Steering. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy, who's just set up our recording for us. So I'll start again. My name is Holly, and I'm one of the members of the steering committee for the Quakers and Pastoral Care and Counseling. And we are hosting this evening along with the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry, which is headed right now by Wendy Cooler. And in our planning, it seemed very suitable for us to get together and bring our communities together to talk about what it's like to receive and seek support through Quaker processes. So we're expecting about 20 some people here this evening. We'll see how many folks come. We'll plan to meet for about an hour and a half. And our agenda for our evening is going to be hearing from some ministers who have been receiving or have received Quaker support and how that came about and what it was like for them or is like for them, and also for suggestions for them about this process for maybe those of us who are interested in getting more support for the ministries that we carry. There are a variety of ministers and all the ways that ministry is given to us, both in our hearts and our individual lives and our collective lives together, which is definitely the biggest part, I believe, of what it's like to be a Quaker ministry is to be in service with others. So we will structure our time with having each of our ministers give a little bit introduction about themselves. We have some prepared questions for them to think about just the nuts and bolts of what the ministry is and what kind of support that they've received for how long and where they're getting their ministry or practicing or in service. And then there will be a chance for the panelists to talk more around some of the questions about good support that they've received, or maybe places that might need some extra attention, or advices and queries that they have for us. And that'll lead us to the top of the hour, and then we'll stop the recording, and then we'll have chances for discussion and questions for everyone to pitch in and chime in. Feel free if you need to leave early, you might throw your question in the chat. So, or message myself, and then we'll make sure it gets answered, and we can follow up with an email if that was something of concern for you. If you need to step away at any time, please take care of yourselves. Of course, do. And give us a wave goodbye if you need to leave. If there's some other way that we can be of service or help to you, feel free to reach out in the chat, in a message to me or other friends, and we'll get started. So we have 5 panelists. In addition to the 3 that we've introduced, there are 2 other folks, and Wendy will, and they'll introduce themselves too, but all folks who have carried or are carrying ministry and have been in service in the Quaker way. So we didn't decide who wanted to go first, so I'm going to let someone speak out of the silence for that. And I'll give us time. We'll do about 4 minutes. I'll give you a warning, and then hopefully we'll move through the time and get lots of good questions answered. Thanks.
Well, I can go. So I'm Wendy Cooler. I'm currently serving as the convener of the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry. This is a project that is under the care of Sandy Spring Friends Meeting. Before you got here, Kat was talking about how important it is that ministry grow out of the meeting. And indeed, that is the mission of the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry, is to help meetings develop the capacity to hold ministry. And then our plan is to fade away within a few years after having helped as many meetings as possible during our short life, our necessarily short life. Success means that meetings will be able to carry this ministry forward on their own, and you won't need us anymore. So if you know who I am, you probably know me from the more than a decade I spent with a ministry around interpersonal violence in Quaker homes and Quaker communities. And I just want to say that Joan, who's here today, is the person who told me I was a Quaker public minister and defined that term for me the first time 15 years ago. And I'm just so pleased to be on this panel with people I know and people I don't know. I think that caregiving, pastoral care, and public ministry are deeply wedded to one another. And that's something that I hope our meetings can embrace more in the years to come. I find it helpful to eliminate awkwardness to just call on the next person so people don't have to choose to unmute themselves. And if it's okay, I will do that to Sarah. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Happy to. My name is Sarah Allen. Um, I grew up in Cambridge Friends Meeting, where I'm still a member, and and I'm carrying a ministry now that is around how we together discover and develop practices of peacemaking in our homes and communities. And had some lovely interactions with Wendy Cooler and collaborations around that. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about a brief story arc of really being in this lovely community where I became a Quaker and joined my meeting, and it really framed my spirituality and who I am. And that was a rich and lovely experience. And then as a young adult, I realized actually we weren't practicing Quaker values and practices within our home. And I had separated these two places, and meeting was my safe space. And when I came to this realization, I separated from Quaker community. And for 30 years, I carried this concern, meaning to do something with it, but not feeling able to, with various excuses and hoping that it would no longer be mine to carry until a few years ago. And I actually looked it up. In early 2022, a friend of mine helped me write a letter to Cambridge Friends Meeting and ask for a clearness committee on membership. Could I be a Quaker? When I had carried this concern about how we are together in our communities and families, and when we aren't practicing the peace. What is the peace testimony when it comes to our homes? And I was very angry at Quakers and felt like I want to be a Quaker, but I can't. And out of this clearness committee came a query, which was based on George Fox's rendition of the peace testimony, where he said, do we live in the virtue of that life and power that takes away the occasion of all war? So I reworded it as, do we live in the virtue of that life and power that takes away the occasion of abuse? And within within intimate partners, within our family, in all forms. And that was a very hard query for friends to hear. And it was not always well received by friends. Yet I was affirmed with this clearness committee that it was an emerging ministry. And the meeting, after long discernment from ministry and council, gathered a support committee for me, which I like to call either a care and accountability committee or an anchor team, because it's as much accountability to the meeting as it is accountability for me. And so the meeting is supporting my ministry, and my ministry is led by Spirit, is what this committee, and we meet monthly. And we've been meeting since March 2023. I've also received grants. I've, with a lot of help, pursued grants to support my ministry in various ways. Jane Jackson, who's here today, has been provided financial oversight and helped me with tracking finances and reporting to the various funders. I also have a informal set of friends and a small group who have accompanied me in reading difficult material and worshiping together. and gathering friends for events and ensuring that there's pastoral care at events and that we have a real gathered meeting around grappling with difficult truths in our society of friends. And so that, I've found throughout this, the practice of really visiting with friends has really helped in, as well as having all of these structures, one-on-one conversations has really helped me discover um, untapped, powerful connections. And so that's I think that I've answered their intro questions, and I will pass it to Kat.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, friends. um, I'm retired now from the Ministry of Hospital Chaplaincy. I served in that capacity for 33 years in a few different states. A couple of hospitals in Indiana where I did my education at Earlham School of Religion with Holly, and then came back to the West Coast where I'm from. First served at a hospital in Southern California and then finished out my career in Portland, Oregon, which is where my wife is from and where our family is, our surviving family. Um, I had I was mentioning to the panelists before we got on this call, Michael Burkle, who some of you might know in a teaching capacity or maybe read some of his books, was a longtime professor at Earlham College, says that we have a lot of tools in our Quaker tool belt if we'd only learn to use them. And so I took that to heart, and I, from the get, used these Quaker tools. I knew that I would have to get a minute of endorsement of for this ministry in order to jump through the professional hoops that I was led in order to get the ability to practice this ministry. We have to go through some uh, we have to labor and go through some steps to get there. So I did that with my meeting every step of the way. It was a couple of uh, what I would call weighty friends. We might call them elders now, since that term has been rehabilitated, um, who approached me in my meeting and saying, well, you're already doing this ministry. Why do you need to go to seminary? Why do you need to, dot all the I's and cross the T's? And so we engaged in a laboring in an educational uh, uh, process to translate the world's requirements to the Quaker meeting, right? And that was a difficult process, and I wanted to lift that up. That sometimes we, who are led to ministries, have to educate our meetings on what that means, and we might get a lot of resistance and a lot of pushback about it, because there are friends who come to friends from a very wounded place in other denominations and in other places of life, and so. Anyway, so that's what I did. And so I had a clearness committee. I did clinical pastoral education, which is one of those, hoops that you have to jump through before going to seminary. And I had clearness committee all the way through that. And after I got through that, I applied to Earlham because I knew that I would have to have that degree in order to continue the leading. I was cleared to continue on. So the Clearness Committee was with me all that way. The meeting supported me financially, paid for my tuition and my books all the way. And nobody who did that could write it off because I wasn't a charitable, thing. But the meeting felt that they were putting a minister forward. So they took some responsibility for that. Forever grateful for that. And then, every time we moved, around the country, I had to get the meeting, the Quaker meetings letter of endorsement to send to my professional association, the Association of Professional Chaplains, and just do all those steps. And it took an educational effort on my part every time, some backlash and resistance every time. You mean you pray for people? Well, yes, friend, don't you? You know?
It's been about 4 minutes, so.
Okay. So, just the nuts and bolts questions about how often did you meet? We met. I've always had, the different configurations of the Acre Committee. It was very important to me. I did not suggest people. I went to ministry and counsel, or ministry and oversight, it used to be called, or, whatever uh, names they are, and I requested an Acre Committee. And they would always ask, do you have friends that you would like to see on it? And I would say, no, but I have these characteristics that I want on it. And I always wanted people who were conversant of the healthcare field and people who are of divergent theological views. In my area here in the West Coast, we have an overlap of different yearly meetings. And so like my last anchor committee involved a person from Northwest Yearly Meeting, Evangelical Friends International, that became a Sierra Cascades Yearly Meeting, and then a couple of friends from North Pacific Yearly Meeting. And that's just invaluable support. I mean, other Quaker support, I would say, would be Quakers in Pastoral Care and Counseling was uh, life-saving in so many ways, both being together in this community of friends and taking leadership responsibilities in this organization was very, very important. So that's basically it on these questions. So I'll leave it there. So who hasn't? Joan, would you like to go next?
Okay. So I guess like Sarah, I came to Quakers over 40 years ago with a family history of emotional abuse with my Quaker grandparents. So much so that my father would have nothing to do with any religion at all, let alone Quakers. And yet I came to Quakers hopeful. I saw something here that could be healing. I still haven't understood what happened with my grandparents and that situation. I have a lot of ideas, but so I found myself training to be a marriage and family therapist, and at the same time entering the world of Quakers. And those two things interlocked. and still interlock and interface. And I learned both. I learned my Quaker experience informed my professional life and vice versa. So in the early 80s, I too joined that effort of Judy Brutz with the experience of violence among friends, and learned a lot. And at the same time, I was led to become part of Friends Couple Enrichment. And I learned about that through my professional life, through David Mace, who was a Quaker who created what was called marriage enrichment, and then we named it Friends Couple Enrichment. In order to be a leader couple, you need to be a committed couple. You don't need to be a professional. And we infused Quaker practices in that. But the one thing that wasn't there was the support from monthly meetings. And when I went to my monthly meeting, well, first of all, I went to the yearly meeting and they didn't know what to do. Ministry and pastoral care. Over time, to make this short, over time, right now, people who are leaders in that service do go to their monthly meetings. Things have changed, friends. I'm here to say I've seen the movement. I've experienced the movement. People do go to the monthly meetings, get clearness, get support from their monthly meetings and maybe their yearly meetings. But we didn't. Fast forward to, so the support came from the Friends Couple Enrichment group itself, just like QPCC, probably surprised that we honed this practice and included and kept improving what we did and incorporating Quaker spiritual practices along the way, which the founder, David Mace and Vera, had not. They'd some, but not, it wasn't as explicit as we were able to make it over the years. Fast forward to the early 2000s when Baltimore Yearly Meeting is part of Friends United meeting, and we had a really big disagreement with their personnel policy, and we struggled whether or not we would participate with them, continue to be part of FUM, and we ended up creating an intervisitation program, which we called a ministry of presence. And I think that ministry of presence is what we do in pastoral counseling. It's what I did as a therapist. It's what you are present with somebody. What we did was go out and we're present with Friends United meeting, yearly meetings, and some monthly meetings in the Midwest. We visited evangelical friends. What we asked for is that those who were led to travel in this ministry get a clearness committee and a support committee from their monthly meeting. And as Kat just said, nobody knew how to do it. And so we had to educate along the way. And even at Sandy Spring, where we had one of the first people do this, later on, I came to Sandy Spring and asked for a travel minute. And the Ministry and Council Committee had forgotten how to do it. So we had to educate again. So I've spent the last few years really supporting public ministers and those of us who are led, which is why I ended up, I guess when I named Wendy as a public minister, she says 15 years ago. She remembers exactly, I don't. It was out of this experience of how important that was and how much we needed to have that among friends and to do better. So right now, I end up being a support person on several other support committees, but I have to say it's a mutual support. Even when I'm a support person, I benefit from it. So I'm not just giving. I am giving and receiving. I do the last few years when I retired from my professional work, laid my license down, I did contract. I see a spiritual director from used to be New England Yearly Meeting, and now she's at Intermountain Yearly Meeting. So for the first time, I've had that kind of direct support for what I am doing, which is a lot of eldering as well as ministering. So
Thank you, Joan. Is there anything else before
no,
for that?
that's it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I think Adria is our
Yeah,
final.
last friend standing. So my name is Adria DeCapua. I live in central New Jersey. I'm a member of Chatham Summit Friends Meeting in New York Yearly Meeting. And my ministry is it's so funny because I haven't had to actually. That's a harder question than it sounds like. It sounds like such a simple question. But I think that if I had to describe my ministry, it's inviting friends to live as though we actually believed the things we say we believe.
Mm.
Um, and so that looks like a lot of different things. I've written some and for Friends Journal, Pendle Hill pamphlets. I have been an active minister in Friends of Jesus Fellowship, served on ESR's board of advisors, led workshops on recognizing, naming, and nurturing spiritual gifts, listening as a practice of pastoral care. I spent 5 years as a professional mediator and, still work in conflict resolution. My only professional credential is being a lawyer, which I'm not sure is very helpful in this context. So I'm very sympathetic to friends who say, I don't have the right credentials. I'm like, trust me, neither do I. And my inappropriate credentials are extremely expensive. But law for me wound up opening the door to conflict resolution and thinking very deeply about what it means, as a Christian friend, what it means to worship a Prince of Peace and to be called to walk in his footsteps, and what does it mean to live peace with justice as opposed to peace as avoidance, and what does it mean to live peace with confidence as opposed to peace in the midst of tall poppy syndrome. And so that's the path, I think, that invitation to deeper faithfulness that I've been walking for the last 15 years, but I've only had kind of formalized support for that ministry for about the past 6 years. I was forced into a reevaluation of the balance of my life, my ministry, and my paid work by some unchosen life transitions. And I asked for a committee, a support committee, to help me discern how to balance those three aspects of my life. Again, my family, my ministry, and my paid work. And that support committee has stayed with me, with kind of friends rotating in and out as my ministry has become more public and formalized. We that It was another case, as Kat said, where I went to ministry and council and said, I need this committee and I don't know who should be on it, but I sure would love some help. And friends stepped forward, thoughtful, weighty friends. We meet aspirationally we meet monthly, but in the real world, it's every 6 to 8 weeks. Um, and talk about things that are going on with the School of the Spirit course that I'm co-leading, or with my writing, or ministries that I might be led to lay down or take up, and thinking about how that aligns with my own faithfulness as a mother, as a wife, as an employee that needs to be showing up at work in a certain way, as well as in gospel ministry. But I will say that I've also received tremendous support outside of the formal structure of the support committee that's grounded in my meeting. Um, I, just to use an example, I was offering a workshop on spiritual gifts at a Quaker retreat center, and Peter Blood Patterson of New England Yearly Meeting, with whom I had co-led a workshop, but who is just, I was a law student citing his work for my mediation seminar. So it was like, oh, I was like very starstruck, but he texted me and said, "Can we talk about your upcoming workshop?" And I was like, "Sure." And he asked if I would be open to his serving as an elder, and he was a tremendous elder who we can talk about that in the next round of questions. But there have been friends along the way who I consider to be, we all have our feet of clay, but I just look up to them as exemplars of faithful ministry, who've been so gracious and generous in making themselves available. And so that happens kind of, it's always a gift when it happens. It's not predictable, but I do have this ongoing ministry support from my meeting.
Thank you all. Such rich experiences. We have a chance to hear some deeper questions. And some of the members of our steering committee put forward some questions. I'm going to put them in the chat. And for this section, for the next 20 minutes or so, I would invite our panelists, if they would like, this is a chance for you to sort of like lean into kind of that more directive part that kind of could quench a thirst for some people who might feel that they would like more support, or don't know where to get it, or would like to imagine what it would look like. So how did you find people to serve on your support committee, or your clearness committees? Did you have to beg? Did someone offer? Did you pick your own support people? We heard a little bit about that. Tell us about a time when a support person provided valuable help to you, or any advice or queries, advices and queries for the friend in need of support for their ministry. And feel free to pepper in other forms of structure, other kinds of corners of Quaker life, as Kat called it, the toolbox of Quaker things that you've seen at work for people, so that we could be stimulated in that way. And then we'll go for until about the top of the hour, and then we'll take some questions. So might choose one story to tell each, and see where that leads us in time.
I can go. I have a really quick story. Um, and so I told you all that Joan, who is here, told me I was a public minister 15 years ago. And Joan kept me in public ministry about 3 years ago. I had been traveling with a travel minute. I've been on Quaker Speak. I'm a very visible public minister. And Joan had gotten the yearly meeting and the monthly meeting to recognize my public ministry in 2018 and 2019, respectively. But it had become very clear to me very quickly that neither the yearly meeting nor the monthly meeting really knew what that meant. And I was too shy to feel like I knew what it meant, or to articulate what the ministry really needed, or what I, the person carrying it, really needed. I'm from the American South. It's very disrespectful to tell elders what to do. And I just couldn't, I just could not make myself, um, labor with my community. And very often, some of my elders, many of my elders were pretty hurtful to me if I pushed a little bit, in ways that I found, impossible, to communicate through. But I could talk to Joan. Um, and I felt like I was a liar and a hypocrite, basically, about 3 years ago, where I would say, it's true, I had a travel minute, and I had a, certificate, a minute from my meeting saying they recognized my ministry. And so, in many ways, I was better off than many of my peers that I met traveling in the ministry. But I was making negative money. I was going into debt. And I, had substantial emotional and spiritual needs that were not being met. And I just realized that I was being faithless to my home community by persisting like this. And I told Joan, I can't do this anymore. I'm a liar. I also just can't live like this anymore, but I am a liar. And I can't be serving in public ministry when I am so faithless to this community. And this community is so faithless to this ministry that we are being faithless together. And Joan was like, well, we're going to fix that. And Joan's she never takes credit, but she was like, we're going to do something about that. And she did. And Adria serves on my support committee now. So, I just want to say, like, this is not really like a nuts and bolts kind of answer, but I think that, if I were to give any queries to a friend in need of support for their ministry, it would be to search your heart, for faithfulness to your home worshiping community. And if you find that you're not in a relationship where faithfulness is present, why isn't it present? Is there something you can do about that? Is there some way you can labor with them? Who can you bring with you into that labor with them?
I will tell a very brief story, and then I'll also add some nuts and bolts to Wendy's story, if you don't mind, Wendy. I don't want to. Okay, all right. Um, so I mentioned Peter Blood Patterson. As I was kind of preparing this workshop, I thought of someone who I wanted to invite to the workshop, and I invited that friend to the workshop via text message. And we got into this text message exchange that, oh, from that friend's perspective, I was just trying to drum up seats in my workshop, as though I were being like paid on commission for the number of people who came to the workshop, and I was kind of like publicity seeking, or just, in it for my own glory and all these things, when really it was her ministry that had in part inspired some of the work that led to this workshop. So I was just devastated because her experience of that invitation was so different from my intention in for that invitation. Well, I already had a call scheduled with Peter, and I just bawled to him on the phone, and I'm just ugly, ugly crying. Um, on the phone with Peter, and one of the very concrete things that he did in that moment was, one, to reattach me to reality and say, yeah, that sounds, that reaction is not proportionate to what you actually said. So that was a valuable reality check. It is not you, Adria. There's a lot of other stuff going on, and we can't know what that is. But I want to reassure you, like, helped put things in proportion. And he also just held my emotional reaction to what was happening. And I think that one of the things that is really valuable accompaniment is being able, whenever whenever I think we are active in the world, we are bumping up against other people. And that opens up the door for unexpected reactions, some of which are very hurtful and like punishing to us. And it takes like continued going back to the well of the spirit, but also encouragement to keep going in the face of the uncertainty. Is this going to be the time that I press a button that, leads to an explosion? And not knowing is hard. So continuing to be faithful to a ministry call is hard in the face of all of that. And so to have people alongside you to whom you can go when things happen and just say, like, this thing happened, and help me understand what it was, and just hear me while I pour out how I'm feeling about it, and as I process it, and just like witness that with me and be in that with me, I think is an incredibly valuable support. But just to add a little bit to Wendy's story, some of the gifts that I've seen people bring to that, her accountability and support, her support and accountability committee, follow, to the extent that things are happening that are administrative, following up with people to make sure those things are happening, following up with committee clerks, setting up meetings, making sure that we meet as a committee to support Wendy. When Wendy brings something and says, hey, this thing is happening, following up, is there something that we should be doing? How can we support you? Creating space for understanding what resources we have available. Who should we be talking to? Who might we invite to speak with us? We realized at a certain point that there wasn't a lot of vocabulary around gifts in ministry. I was able to step in and offer a workshop at Sandy Spring meeting. I don't know what the impact of that workshop was, but it certainly created a focal point for conversation within the meeting. Sometimes it's a lot of work being a public minister. The education that Kat talked about, you constantly have to educate, educate, educate. Part of what an support can look like for a ministry like that is finding out how to do that education in a way that it's not just on the shoulders of the person engaging in public ministry, so that they're freed up to be just to do the ministry and not necessarily till the ground and water the ground and weed the ground and pour the seeds and all of that also.
I also wanted to chime in and say, like, one of the big lessons I've learned is your meeting is not your ministry and council or your pastoral care team or your committee of this and that told you no. Your meeting is a diverse set of people who are almost every one of them trying to follow spirit in some way and living in the real world, sometimes reacting to things that are not you. And maybe the person who is really there to support you is somebody who's not on the committee that is telling you something you don't want to hear. And it's been really important in my journey to really talk to different people in the meeting to get a sense of the meeting, to not just go through the structures and feel like they're 100% in touch with the spirit of the meeting. Because sometimes it's a premature no. Sometimes a no means not now. Sometimes a no means I didn't understand the question. And it ought not to be that way. But sometimes, we're all human. And the discernment doesn't take into everything that is the wholeness of your ministry. You might not even know the wholeness of your ministry. And there may be another path. Which is not to say your meeting shouldn't be supporting you and there shouldn't be structures that are doing all the right things that will feed your soul and support your ministry. But sometimes the meeting's struggling at the same time as your ministry's rising. And I think in my case, there was some healing there along the way that helped me and helped the meeting. And I think, as Wendy said, trusting in your leading and going back to that leading. You know, how are you really led? And it's hard work, but it's super rewarding. And the other thing I wanted to say about this question was there's two great things I heard from someone on my anchor team who said at one time, I was just really surprised by everyone said, somebody else mentioned this, how much of an honor it was to be part of my anchor team. Whereas I was thinking it was a burden for them. But they were feeling that they were participating in something amazing, answering God's call. And at one time, I was really a little fearful about taking a step. I said, who am I to do this? And one friend said, who are you not to? Who are you to refuse God's call? And that really helped me.
Well, in my experience, I didn't know that I was getting a call or a leading until I was already in it. You know, I think that God's leading just sort of was like this, you know, because if it was too much, I would have run for the hills. And so I too came into this work from a legal background. Adria, you're not the only one. And, but my legal work, God was there because I was traipsing the halls of hospitals. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco, and guys needed legal work done who were dying. And that's what I did. And I became very at ease in hospital environment. I also came from a family where cancer was another family member. So I spent a lot of my youth in hospitals with my dad who had cancer and my brother. So that wasn't leading like to me, but it made me conversant with where way was going to open in my life. And what my anchor eventually, my anchor committees and, KBCC, small groups and da 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 da, were able to help me discern that leading into what, I learned the language for it, kind of as I was doing it, and learned the process of becoming what the way was opening. And so the what these Quaker committees and all our Quaker tools help with. One of the most valuable things somebody said to me in an anchor committee meeting is that Quakers are really good at helping us discern our calls and gifts, helping us discern our leadings. I mean, we're better at that than discerning the end of a call, discerning the end of a meeting, of knowing when it's somebody else's turn. And this is where we get into the tall poppy syndrome, and also what I would call, I'm not as poetic as Max Grundy, what I would call whack-a-mole syndrome. In our Quaker meetings, somebody raises up, whack, especially if they're under 60. Whack, 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 because we want our weighty friend role in our meetings. So I had to really work hard to discern the end of a leading, and my anchor committee helped me with that. QPCC helped me with that. A psychologist helped me with that. It took years because you know how it manifested in me? I started feeling like I was a hireling, right? Does everybody know that term, hireling, becoming a hireling? That's when your integrity gets out of alignment with your call, right? And so I had to really work on that. I really, really had to work on it. My spiritual director, who was a Catholic nun at the time, only said, well, Kat, God will use your humanness to do what God needs to get done. Right? Really helped me. Another friend told me when I was, this was back in seminary, John Punchin, on his last year of teaching, said, you know what? Helpful people tend not to be very helpful. And that came back to me in my ending years, going, here I was helping people. I was still very competent. I was not committing any sort of a vocational malfeasance. I was still getting stellar reviews by everyone. I had lots of letters after my name by that point, but I was out of alignment and I knew it. And what that eventually did in my personal life is it created some burnout, it created compassion fatigue, and it created, but my working with these tools in my tool belt and my Quaker tool belt enabled me to lay a ministry down responsibly and ethically and without any malfeasance toward the people that I was called to care for. Right? It was way sooner than I thought. God, I'd still be working in it now if I could. Right? It was way sooner than I thought, but it was right because Jesus gave me the gold watch and said, well done, friend. Let somebody else carry it now. After 33. No, it was after 30 years. I had a hard time retiring. So the 3 other years were kind of mucking around doing other stuff, providing some pastoral care and counseling, providing, as a case manager for seniors, and I did all sorts of little things, after that. But we're talking about laying it down. And I am firmly convinced that just how I was coaxed in, I was led in gently, always just with a candlelight distance in front of me so I wouldn't get so overwhelmed with everything. The easing out was also gentle. The landing was gentle. It wasn't a crash, it wasn't a burn. So, I mean, my final word, if you want advice from me, which you might not, is get your help, get your support, get your psychotherapist on board so that you can be spoken honest to, because believe me, friends, we don't like to speak the truth to each other. We have a hard time speaking the truth to each other. So get somebody that you're paying to tell you the truth. That would be really nice, you know. And because if you choose not to get the support that you need, you are at risk of committing vocational malfeasance and hurting the people that you're called to love. I've seen it happen so often in the field of ministry, in the pastoral care ministry, in spiritual caregiving, you know, both amongst chaplains. When a chaplain gone bad, the chaplain goes bad, and that stink is all around the hospital, right? Or in the pulpit, when that pastor goes bad, the stink goes high. So get the help you need. And when the truth is something you don't like, you know, you got to eat your vegetables along with all the other stuff. You know, you got to eat what you don't like sometimes, right? Because it's not all dessert. Okay, that's it. I'm off my pulpit now.
Joan, do you feel that there are things that you would like to make sure are in our mix before we turn to questions?
The thing that won't leave me is that this work, Friends, is the peace testimony. It is the peace testimony. And the laboring that we have to do and the courage that we need to gather comes from others, and it comes from our prayer life, how we interact with the Holy Spirit. There's a lot of facets to it. I had a conversation with somebody in our meeting today who is on the peace committee, and for them, the peace committee, the peace work has been about international work, and the message I keep wanting to give to Friends is it's between us. God is in the in-between. I learned that from an AA man one time at a professional conference where we were talking about the G word in counseling, which wasn't allowed. When I was coming up in training, we couldn't talk about God, the Spirit. And I've seen that change too. So I feel at this point in my life, I feel like we are in a revitalization. And this is part of it, what you're doing here. So appreciate this. Thank you.
I hope this isn't too anarchic because I'm talking again and it's like, it's a ruin the order. But I just want to underline what Joan said about this work being the peace testimony. In my corner of the Quaker world, people love the phrase speaking truth to power. But it's like, if you can't speak truth in your own meeting, what business do you have writing your legislator? What business do you have writing the president? Start with speaking truth. And if we could just start with that, we could kind of worry about the context afterwards. But I'm not going to get on that particular soapbox for too long. But it felt really important to say that it it our good intentions get ahead of our integrity so easily. And I include myself in that. But this work of being in spiritual intimacy with each other, which is a big part of the spiritual support, it's a big part of the work of spiritual caregiving. being safe people to be in spiritual intimacy with, I think renders us so much more fit for all other types of faithfulness.
I feel like we have the beginnings of a wonderful book together through this. And I am curious what's stirring in our other members of our community here this evening. Questions, comments. We'll ask Wendy to pause the recording and